The boy missing after the Anchorage power outage. Neighbors in South Edition remember the night the streetlights failed and the block turned to quiet shapes against Cook Inlet. A rolling outage moved across Anchorage after sunset, reportedly tied to an equipment fault at a substation near Tudor. Within that dark window, a 12-year-old boy left a duplex stairwell and was not seen returning by anyone nearby. The disappearance was recorded in dispatch logs as a welfare check that escalated when the caller could not reach family members. Investigators never confirmed the exact minute he stepped off the landing, and surviving records conflict on the sequence that followed. The boy was named Connor Price, age 12, a sixth grader whose mother worked nights as a certified nursing assistant. She was 39, employed at a facility near Lake Otis, and she left home before the outage reached the neighborhood. Her brother, age 34, an auto parts clerk, reportedly checked on Connor after dinner and found him watching storm updates. The uncle told officers he planned a quick drive toward Midtown for batteries, then doubled back when the traffic signals died. State records list his return time as approximate, and some locals claimed they saw the car pass once without stopping. The second person in the case file is Michael Reese, age 47, a floor technician assigned to overnight cleaning at a public office. He rented a ground floor unit in the same building, and he told officers he met the boy a handful of times. Reese said he heard a door close during the outage and looked through a peephole toward the landing. The hallway was dark, the emergency light flickering, and a shoe squeaked once on painted concrete. Archived notes say Reese could not identify whose steps he heard, and investigators never confirmed whether the sound preceded any exterior movement. The third person is Officer Lena Garvey, age 31, the first uniformed responder to sign the initial incident number that evening. She arrived after the lights returned for 2 minutes, then went down again as if the circuit tripped under load. Garvey walked the alley with a flashlight and found a bicycle leaned beside a trash enclosure behind the laundry room. The bicycle reportedly belonged to Connor, though the county file from 2009 notes the registration sticker was unreadable under winter grime. Records conflict over whether the seat height matched his last measurement, and investigators never confirmed if another child borrowed the bike earlier. Dispatch logs show multiple calls about power fluctuations and elevator alarms during the same half hour across adjacent blocks. A maintenance crew radioed a transformer smell near the corner convenience store, then lost contact when their handhelds failed inside a cinder block stairwell. An outage map captured by a local blogger shows a blotch along 8th Avenue, shaded deeper where circuits overlapped across feeders. The image circulated widely that week, and some locals claimed it proved a deliberate shutdown rather than a fault. Investigators never confirmed the blogger's data source, and state records cautioned that crowd screenshots often distort the real switching boundaries. According to the mother's statement, Connor stayed home with a list on the fridge and reminders about homework and the hallway light. She took the bus toward Lake Otis before sunset and called once from the break room during the first reported flicker. The call dropped after a greeting, and she told detectives the silence felt routine during a storm watch. She tried again on her next break and reached voicemail, then contacted her brother, who said he would drive back immediately. Dispatch logs note her third call at shift change, when she reported her nephew missing and asked for a unit to check the duplex. When Garvey stepped inside, the apartment air was cool and smelled like wet socks and an open box of detergent. A pot of macaroni sat crusted on the stove, and a pencil lay under worksheets spread across the table. The window looked toward a utility pole where a crossarm leaned, reportedly cracked by wind during a squall that crossed the water earlier. Garvey noted a jacket missing from hooks by the door and found boots damp with slush left in the corner. The county file from 2009 emphasizes that damp boots were common that month, and investigators never confirmed whether Connor owned another pair. Anchorage police coordinated with utility crews who were moving along feeders to test for faults after repeated trips under load. A crew chief told officers the substation protection had isolated a bad run and that service would stabilize after switching. The crew chief also mentioned a brief arc recorded on supervisory screens around the time neighbors reported the boy leaving. Archived notes capture his phrasing carefully, and state records remind readers that arcs happen often during winter switching. Some locals claimed the arc aligned with the alley and suggested an electrical scare might have drawn the boy outside, though investigators never confirmed that scenario. A security camera at the convenience store faced the corner, then turned off when the outage rolled across that grid square. The owner found corrupted files on the recorder, reportedly caused by repeated starts that exceeded the small battery's tolerance. Two frames remained legible, showing a figure with a hood stepping past stacked bags of ice and pausing at the curb. The height and jacket length were consistent with a small teenager, though shadows widened the outline against the snow. Records conflict on whether the hood carried a stitched logo, and investigators never confirmed a clear facial image from those frames. Searchers walked the Chester Creek Trail the next morning, moving slowly where tire ruts froze into ridges beside the path. A volunteer found a glove near a bench, blue knit with stretched wrist seams and a smudge of grit on two fingers. The mother said Connor owned gloves like that, then grew uncertain when shown a photo that made the knit look darker. The item entered evidence with a notation about uncertain ownership and environmental contamination from overnight frost. Dispatch logs record a second glove reported near the lagoon, then withdrawn when the caller failed to answer a callback, and investigators never confirmed its existence. Is less than hashone. Zero hash is greater than. Reese told detectives he took out trash during the outage and watched headlights scatter on wet pavement along the alley mouth. He believed he saw two silhouettes at the corner, one short and one taller, moving quickly toward a bus stop without speaking. The taller figure held a bag that knocked against a thigh, and the smaller shape glanced back once, then ducked behind a plow berm. Reese admitted uncertainty about distance because a neighbor's generator vibrated metal stairs, blurring his focus during the observation. Archive notes repeat that admission twice, and state records mark the sighting as uncorroborated, though the timing matched the outage window closely. The uncle described his errand as routine, a circuit of two stores that usually carried batteries and a small propane canister. He said traffic stalled along C Street because signals blinked, then went dark, and drivers edged through with horn taps. He circled once near the duplex, saw the stairwell light flash, and assumed the unit would stabilize after the next switch. When he reached the door, he called the boy's name and found quiet rooms and a page of homework under a phone. Records conflict over whether he entered the building on his first pass, and investigators never confirmed his drive path using available cameras. During interviews, classmates mentioned a plan for sledding after the next snowfall, with a meeting point near a small park in Midtown. One friend reportedly texted about a borrowed sled and a repaired headlamp that could run on backup batteries. The phone recovered from the table contained an unfinished reply that referenced the headlamp but not the meeting point specifically. The county file from 2009 highlights the gap between the unfinished reply and the last status report recorded by the device. Investigators never confirmed whether the boy intended to leave for that plan during the outage, though some locals claimed they heard excited voices outdoors. Weather logs show gusts along the inlet that lifted salty spray and glazed sidewalks through brief freezing drizzle. Utility crews reported linemen slipping on ladders and pausing work to salt rails at a substation gate. A transit driver radioed about passengers crowding on board while streetlights remained dark, then asked dispatch for guidance about unsupervised minors. That message appears in dispatch logs 3 minutes after the first welfare check, placing both threads inside the same operational window. Investigators never confirmed whether the driver passed the boy's block, and state records refrained from connecting those events beyond proximity and shared conditions. A resident 2 buildings east kept a paper notebook for power blinks because appliances sometimes failed during voltage dips. He wrote times in blocky numbers and kept tallies for each blink counted in the kitchen with a candle burning nearby. His notes include a scribble labeled child voice, then a short arrow toward the alley where the bicycle was recovered earlier. Archived notes indicate the resident could not recall whether the voice came before or after the second deep blackout. The county file from 2009 cautions that manual notations during outages are notoriously fuzzy, and investigators never confirmed the accuracy of the marks. By the second day, snow hardened into ruts and footprints lost shape under municipal plow passes along the trail network. A drone team flew grids above the greenbelt, then battled interference near transmission lines that hummed as power stabilized across feeders. The team reported brief signal jitter along one corridor that paralleled the alley and turned toward a drainage culvert under the avenue. Some locals claimed the jitter implied an object inside the culvert, though the pilot later tested and reproduced interference near similar lines. Investigators never confirmed any anomaly beyond routine radio noise, and state records treat the flight logs as inconclusive but properly archived. Several tips arrived from neighborhoods west of Minnesota Drive, where residents reported a boy matching Connor's height near a bus kiosk. One caller described a child in a gray jacket asking about a route to turn again, then walking away when a bus arrived. Another caller insisted the boy rode north toward a stop near Northern Lights, carrying a bag shaped like a folded sled. The uncle told officers Connor did not own a folding sled, then paused and said a friend might have loaned one earlier. Records conflict on whether that friend was contacted promptly, and investigators never confirmed the kiosk sightings beyond uncollected footprints on packed snow. On the third day, the mother returned to the duplex with an officer and found a faint shoe mark on the stairwell landing. The print was partial, smudged by slush, and measured close to the size the boy wore during the previous winter. A second print overlapped at an angle that suggested a quick turn toward the alley door rather than the interior hallway. Photographs entered the county file from 2009 show grainy edges and flash reflections from chipped paint across the riser. Some locals claim the prints proved a rushed exit, though investigators never confirmed gate direction from marks that degraded under repeated entries. A week later, state records show the case coded for continuing investigation with periodic checks when new outage reports surface. Utilities repaired the cracked crossarm and replaced fuses that had tripped during the storm, then published a maintenance summary on their website. The summary listed the outage window within broader operations and mentioned no injuries recorded during the night of the disappearance. Families in the neighborhood saved copies of the page, and archived notes record residents arguing over the meaning of terse language. Investigators never confirmed any link between the maintenance summary and the case, and dispatch logs closed the thread without additional explanation. The mother kept working nights, reportedly moving to a different facility after winter gave way to an early break in ice. She told a counselor she avoided the alley and took a longer path around the block when errands required walking past the stairwell. Reese transferred to a different building, and the uncle changed shifts at the parts store, then stopped answering reporters who knocked. Some locals claimed these changes were meaningful, while neighbors said people adjust their routes when winter ends and work schedules shift. The county file from 2009 preserves both views without judgment, and investigators never confirmed that any adjustment held investigative weight. Years later, the duplex paint flaked in the same stairwell, and the door closer still dragged when the hallway cooled. A new tenant found a child's library card under the second step, then turned it over to a clerk downtown. The clerk checked the number and found the card expired before the outage, then wrote a note that attached to the record. Archived notes say the mother could not identify the card as her son's, and records conflict on the listed address. Investigators never confirmed a connection, though the discovery reopened conversations that move through Anchorage whenever lights flicker against winter clouds. The teacher missing from Cold Springs Elementary. Parents in Placerville still mention a teacher who left her classroom keys on the desk, stepped into the breezeway, and vanished. The building sits north of Main Street, where the oak trees break the summer wind and buses idle near the loop. Afternoon bell lines faded under traffic noise, while a janitor rolled a static scarred cart toward the multipurpose room. No one noticed anything unusual until the office printer kept spitting forms long after the halls went quiet. Her name in district rosters is Janine Clark, 34, fifth grade teacher, in town to finish a contracted year. She rented a small studio south of Broadway, reportedly quiet, and kept a habit of walking to work before sunup. Colleagues described careful lesson plans stacked by week and a folded cardigan tucked inside a drawer near the class library. County file from 2009 shows a previous placement in Humboldt County with satisfactory notes and no disciplinary flags. On a warm Thursday in late May of 2019, the office clock read 3:20 when dismissal wrapped. Several students returned for forgotten lunchboxes, one parent asked about reading logs, and buses pulled away. Janine signed the dismissal sheet, placed 2 graded packets in a labeled bin, and told the secretary she would lock up. Dispatch logs later noted a routine call about a stalled sedan on Placerville Drive, unrelated, around the same window. The custodian that week was Arthur Mendez, 57, night shift, on site to prep the gym for a community meeting. He said he saw Janine cross the breezeway with a manila folder under one arm, moving toward the staff room. He remembered a quick wave and a half smile, nothing hurried, and a quiet hallway where the trophy case hummed. His statement says he kept mopping by the south doors until the wax turned even and the clock hit 4. At 4:15, according to archive notes kept by the principal, a substitute teacher named Erin stopped by the copier. She noticed the machine running with no one nearby, pages in neat stacks, and a sticky note asking to refill paper. The sticky note showed Janine's looping script, though investigators never confirmed the note's exact time because the ink bled slightly. Erin said she refilled the tray, gathered the stacks, and left them on the counter under a laminated safety poster. State records show the district uses a keycard system that logs exterior entries, though interior movement remains untracked. The card assigned to Janine recorded entry at 6:51 that morning, and no exit swipe appears that afternoon. Investigators cautioned that propped doors near the breezeway could bypass the system, and some locals claimed staff sometimes did that. Maintenance logs mention hinge repairs on the east exit, possibly encouraging the practice when the wind pressed hard against the frame. A parent volunteer named Samuel Wright, 41, delivery driver, on-site to stack donated books, offered a different recollection. He carried 2 boxes toward the library when he heard a short conversation from the staff room that he could not parse. He saw a figure in a blue jacket by the vending machine, not a teacher he recognized, facing the window. He did not see Janine, and he reported the detail only after reading a notice requesting timelines the following Monday. Investigators mapped movements on a campus diagram printed from county archives using colored pins to mark estimated positions and times. The staff room window faces a small garden where students grow tomatoes, and a service gate opens toward the back lot. Security cameras cover the front entrance and the bus loop, leaving the service gate and breezeway without recording. Some locals claimed a camera once watched the breezeway, though budget minutes do not confirm any equipment there during that year. Janine's sedan remained in the parking row closest to the flagpole when deputies arrived around 7 after a delayed call. She kept a reusable water bottle in the cup holder and a spiral notebook on the passenger seat with math notes. The engine was cold and the windows were cracked a finger width, which is common when classrooms run warm in May. A small tote in the back seat contained graded essays bundled with twine and a paper marked for revision. Her phone pinged the tower near Bedford Avenue until 4:27, then showed no further activity that day. A records technician later explained that coverage drops inside certain parts of the building, especially near the inner hall. Investigators never confirmed whether the device powered down or lost battery because the handset was not recovered. The district retains a bring-your-own-device policy, which complicates retrieval of carrier details without a separate order. County file from 2009 includes an older missing person from the same district, though the circumstances differ widely. That case involved a grounds worker who left during a winter storm and returned 2 days later without explanation. Some locals claimed a pattern, but the sheriff publicly said the comparison did not hold and records conflict on timing. The archived notes from that earlier incident emphasize exhausted staffing and slow road clearance rather than campus conditions. A neighbor at Janine's complex told deputies she heard footsteps outside the unit around 5:45 that morning. She described keys clinking and a short cough, which matches a routine Janine mentioned at a staff wellness meeting. The neighbor did not see anyone that afternoon. and she thought Janine would attend a training on the following day. That training appears in district calendars, location marked as the county office, which aligns with emails recovered from the principal's account. A week later, search teams walked the trails behind the school where oak leaves gather in dry gullies. They checked culverts near the water district fence and traced the drainage channel that runs toward the old railroad grade. Cadaver dogs alerted once near a cluster of trash cans, then lost interest, which handlers later described as inconsistent. Investigators never confirmed that alert because wind and heat had shifted and the cans had been emptied earlier that morning. Friends from her previous post in Humboldt County described a cautious person who favored steady routines over last-minute plans. She called her mother on Sundays, kept receipts in envelopes by month, and logged miles for tax records with tidy lines. In Placerville, she reportedly joined a small literacy group that met near Cedar Ravine on alternating Thursdays for practice tutoring. Attendance sheets show 3 meetings in April and early May, and her name appears on each page in neat print. The principal told investigators that budget season pulled staff into long hours and multiple hiring files stacked on her desk. She said she spoke briefly with Janine about a special education referral, and she promised to follow up by email. That email exists in the server archive, timestamped 112, with a short reply from Janine at 1:14. The reply references a student name that is redacted in released records, which limits independent confirmation of the context. Several community members recalled seeing a white pickup near the service gate at approximately 4, parked crooked with no emblem. A grounds crew worker said the truck belonged to a vendor who repaired drinking fountains, though the schedule lists no visit. Investigators never confirmed the plate because the gate camera did not exist, and statements vary on the exact bumper stickers. Some locals claimed they saw a ladder in the bed, while others remembered a cooler and a tangle of rope. The custodian Arthur later clarified that he locked the East Hall at 4:30, then walked toward the dumpsters. He said the sky had turned pale with high cirrus, and the gym smelled like fresh varnish from the morning coat. He rolled the empty cart past the staff room and noticed a chair pulled out, a half banana, and a humming refrigerator. He did not see the manila folder, and he could not say whether the copier stacks had been moved inside. Family interviews indicate Janine planned a weekend trip to Auburn to see an old roommate who waited at a cafe. The roommate sent a message at 6, then another at 7, and assumed traffic had slowed the drive. When no reply came by 9, she called the district number on the website and reached voicemail. She filed a welfare check request, which appears in dispatch logs at 9:23, triggering the evening response to the campus. A teacher from a neighboring classroom said she found a sticky note under a stapler on the following morning. The note read that a parent conference needed rescheduling after a sibling pickup issue, and the signature looked like Janine's line. Investigators never confirmed whether the note was written that day or earlier in the week, and light smudges complicated analysis. The pen used matched office stock pens that many staff share, which limited any useful tracing of ink purchase records. A local who walks dogs near the fence line reported hearing a short whistle from the garden area around 4:10. He thought it was a child imitating a bird and did not approach the gate, which often sticks near the latch. He later wondered if it signaled someone, though investigators cautioned against building narratives from faint memory. His statement was filed, and the report notes residual mower noise from a neighbor's yard that could mimic a whistle. State records confirm that Janine held a valid credential, and her evaluations listed steady classroom management with consistent routines. Her attendance from January through May showed 2 personal days for dental work and 1 sick day after a winter cold. Payroll noted a pending stipend for after-school tutoring, which had not yet been issued when the year closed. None of those items suggested sudden resignation, and investigators emphasized that employment indicators can mislead when other pressures build quietly. During summer, crews replaced the east exit hinges and repainted the breezeway where varnish had peeled under repeated heat. A maintenance supervisor said the project had been scheduled earlier and supplies were ordered before the school year ended. Some locals claimed the timing erased scuffs that might matter, though county guidelines require routine upkeep before fall. Investigators never confirmed whether any scuff carried evidentiary value, and photos in the file show only generalized wear. In September of that year, hikers reported a neatly folded cardigan near a turnout on Mosquito Road beyond the river. Deputies collected it and noted size and label, which aligned with a brand Janine favored in photos from field trips. The cardigan carried no traceable tag to the store, and rain had passed, which softened any residue on the fabric. The lab report listed indeterminate results, and records conflict on whether the color matched one seen in her classroom drawer. A tip line produced calls about a blue jacket figure seen near the staff room, but descriptions varied by height. One caller remembered a limp, another mentioned a ball cap, and a third thought the zipper shone under fluorescent light. Investigators compared the accounts, and they never confirmed whether those details refer to a single person or several passers-by. The vending machine vendor list showed restock on Tuesday, not Thursday, which complicates assumptions about who lingered in that corner. As the year turned, the district reassigned the classroom and boxed the remaining supplies for storage in a locked cage. A new teacher unpacked the math notebooks after winter break and found a roster with penciled updates beside surnames. The updates matched Janine's handwriting according to a reading specialist who trained with her, though the dateline is blank. The specialist gave a statement that she last saw Janine at lunchtime on Thursday, standing by the copy room doorway. A brief item ran in the local paper referencing a missing teacher, and it led with courteous language about community support. The article cited the sheriff and the principal with spare quotes, and it named the school without giving the address. Comments online drifted toward speculation about roadways and footpaths, which investigators discourage when maps can mislead. That caution appears in archived notes from early briefings, and the phrasing repeats across updates released over the next months. By spring of the next year, the case summary condensed into a timeline that begins with the morning entry swipe. It lists classroom activities through dismissal, notes the copier running, places Arthur in the South Hall, and places Samuel near the library. It marks the unverified blue jacket sighting, the unlogged service gate area, and the sedan parked by the flagpole when dusk settled. Then the line ends with the phone ping drop and a blank field where investigators wrote pending until further leads arise. Some locals claimed they saw her hiking on weekends near Cronin Ranch, yet trail cameras never placed her there. Others believed a rideshare picked her up near the loop, but state records show no relevant trips in that time. Theories about staff conflicts appear in informal threads, and investigators never confirmed any disputes that fit the timeline. The available documents lean toward quiet routine turning into absence, and the file holds that shape without stating a cause. The district still keeps her name in older newsletters stored on a public folder that parents browse during enrollment. There are photos of book fairs and science night tables, and in one image, she adjusts a poster while students grin. None of the images show unusual visitors, and timestamps land months before late May, which narrows their significance. The folder remains a reference point for volunteers who remember that spring and for families who ask about the old garden. The classroom has new posters now, and the breezeway smells like wax again when summer arrives and heat rises. Children run toward buses, teachers wave with clipboards, and the office printer chugs through permission slips that stack on the counter. A sign near the garden asks people to keep the gate closed, though the latch still feels loose on windy afternoons. The story remains mostly paper and recollection, anchored by dispatch logs and sober lines that leave the ending open. The stories. Paramedic who kept the final snapshot from triage. The last photo on Kira Voss's work phone was never supposed to survive the software pilot. It stayed anyway after the server hiccup. Kira was 34. A city paramedic who liked quiet late calls and neat paperwork. She started that Tuesday on basic supply checks and light banter. Her goal sounded simple in her head. Finish a 10-hour shift without a single upgrade, then get home before midnight for leftover curry. The call that changed the night came from a roadside motel behind a car wash. Dispatch logged an unresponsive male, unknown age, possible overdose. She and her partner, Mateo Lark, rolled in with lights low and voices steady. Room 12 smelled like cleaner and stale heat from the wall unit. A thin man lay sideways between the bed and a chair. breathing shallow and quick. No wallet in sight. A cracked phone blinking a silent screen. Kira saw a visitor sticker stuck to his hoodie pocket. The date line was smudged, but the background color looked like a clinic pass. They bagged him for a minute to settle his breathing. A half-full paper cup sat by the sink, ice melted into a flat circle of water. Vital signs were jumpy, but not crashing. He opened his eyes once and said a short word that sounded like Riley. Then he slipped under again. They moved fast to the medical center near the river. The radio reported a separate pileup north, which meant triage would be crowded and loud. The hospital had been piloting an electronic intake tool all month. It asked for a quick face photo to match a barcode before the wristband print. The intake line was 3 deep when they arrived. A nurse pushed the cart forward, the printer chattered, everyone talked clipped and fast on instinct. Kira snapped the photo at the kiosk because the app flashed a warning. Upload pending, network unstable. She kept his hoodie on because he shook. The man landed in a monitored bay by the doors. A resident named Bryn Ketter called for labs and a gentle drip. The resident squinted at the chart. Kira wrote her run sheet near the sink. She noted the visitor sticker and the motel room number, and she logged the time from the wall clock. Security cut a small plastic bag from the man's waist string. The bag held a folded laundromat card, a bent key, $3, and a receipt. A second surge of ambulances flooded triage with crash patients. Yellow tags and green tags pressed into the hallway. Voices layered into a dense cloud. In the noise, someone swapped beds to clear space. The man with the hoodie slid one bay over, and a crash patient took his place under a portable lamp. Kira and Mateo finished their handoff after an hour. The man seemed stable. They cleaned the stretcher rails, signed the tablet, and walked toward the exit. The code alarm sounded from the bay they had left. Kira swiveled in the doorway and saw movement through bodies. Someone called for epinephrine with a clipped tone. She stood still without getting in the way. The team pushed and counted and charted. The monitor flattened once, then kicked back, then flatlined again while staff switched roles. Kira did not like leaving after a loss. She did what protocol allows. She tapped Mateo's arm. Then they cleared the doorway and stepped into the humid night. Back at the station, reports stacked up behind them. An hour later, an internal message flagged her run. The patient from the motel did not make it. The summary blamed an unknown allergy aggravated by a blood pressure medication. It suggested the crew had no information at scene and that intake documentation was incomplete. Kira read that line twice. She remembered scratching on his left palm, faint letters smudged by sweat and cleaner. She also remembered the sticker on the hoodie pocket. She opened her notes app and zoomed on a quick photo of the motel nightstand. A corner of the visitor sticker showed a logo like a lighthouse beacon. Her phone buzzed again with a request from quality assurance. Please confirm the scene contained no allergy indications. Please confirm no wallet or tags were found. Kira typed careful answers. She wrote that the scene had no formal bracelet, but there was writing on skin and a clinic sticker with a date line. She could hear Mateo in the next room telling a joke about stale granola bars. She closed her eyes, pictured the kiosk light, and remembered the app freeze. She opened the work app and saw the pending icon. The photo from triage had sat in the queue since that busy hour. It should have deleted itself. She saved a copy to the secure folder because the pilots sometimes ate evidence. Officers who handle accident scenes had warned crews to keep their own digital trail. In the photo, the man stared past the kiosk, eyes unfocused, mouth clenched. The shot was crisp enough to read small print on the edge of his hoodie. She leaned toward the phone and read the visitor sticker again. The shape matched a clinic 2 miles north. The color matched last week's series on their site. She noticed something else that bothered her. The wristband in the photo was already on his right wrist, and the printed name was not Riley or unknown. The name read Colin Hart with a birth year that was wrong by 2 decades. The band also carried a room assignment for a different wing upstairs. Kira checked the run sheet and confirmed the time on the photo. It was taken before he left intake, with a clock in the frame above the desk. She balanced possibilities in her head. Either the band printer reused a label by accident, or triage grabbed a band intended for someone from the crash. She called the station supervisor and spoke in a flat voice. She also saved the app log and the photo metadata. She wanted a clean chain if asked. The supervisor told her to hold steady. He said quality would reach out by morning and that she should write her memory within the next hour. Kira wrote about the motel room, the visitor sticker, the palm writing, and the switch between bays during the crash surge. She avoided guesses and listed times. By sunrise, the hospital asked to speak with her. A calm coordinator named Lauren Pike scheduled a meeting in a small office near the loading dock. Loren listened without interruption while Kira laid out the sequence. He wrote down the kiosk freeze, the wrong name on the band, and the sticker details. "Do you have the photo?" he asked plainly. Kira nodded once and slid her phone forward. Loren studied the image like a puzzle that did not want solving. He asked for permission to copy the file into their incident folder. Kira agreed and asked for a printed receipt of transfer. Lauren printed one with a timestamp. Later that day, security pulled camera clips around intake and the hallway. Audio is thin in those clips, but timestamps line up with dispatch logs from that hour. A volunteer recalled bumping the band cart while pushing crash supplies. The cart carried 2 stacks from different printers. A stack fell and another stack landed on top. A nurse remembered seeing a resident hand off a half-printed band to clear paper jams. Everyone meant well, and the hallway demanded corners get rounded to save seconds. The wrong band landed on the wrong wrist during the shuffle. The allergy field below the name read none, and the medication plan followed that value at speed. The palm writing found in the photo said lisinopril with a shaky loop on the L. That writing matched a pharmacy warning card found later in the discarded bag. The path to his name was still unsolved. The wrong band had masked his identity, and the motel room registry carried a fake first name paid in cash. Kira and Mateo stopped by the motel between calls and spoke to the clerk. The clerk remembered the man because he had asked for late checkout and offered a 10. The clerk described a quiet talker with a careful way of folding receipts. He said the man asked if the clinic across the highway took walk-ins on Sundays. Kira asked if he had left anything behind. The clerk pulled a small envelope from under the counter and handed it over. Inside was a second laundromat card. The card carried the same punched pattern as the one from his bag. A faded stamp showed a cartoon lighthouse that matched the clinic logo from the sticker. Kira wrote the clinic name into her notes and searched internal contacts for a social worker who knew someone there. Network rules can sometimes solve what computers cannot. By evening, a social worker faxed a staff list with a first name that matched the word Riley from the ambulance. A receptionist there recalled a cousin who visited often. The cousin lived near the rail tracks and had shared rides with a man named Rail Hinton. That name pulled a match from the clinic immunization folder with a phone number. The number reached a sister on the third ring. She had been calling hospitals all day without luck. She cried once, then steadied, and asked for straight answers. Kira gave the sister the number for Loren and the case coordinator. She explained that the hospital would confirm identity through records, and that she would share what she could. The sister described Rael as a careful man who wrote allergy reminders on his hand while saving for new glasses. She said he kept every receipt because he lost a wallet once. She also said he used visitor stickers as bookmarks. He picked them from clinic bowls like candy, because ink on paper made him feel less small. The hospital identified him formally by evening, using clinic records and a dental chart from an old file. The visitor sticker linked the timeline to a specific morning. The report shifted. Instead of blaming a vague, unknown allergy, the document focused on a band cart process and a printer override protocol during surge conditions. Quality assurance asked to keep Kira's photo, which showed the wrong band before bedside orders fired. Her pending upload had turned into an anchor for the timeline. Loren thanked her in a quiet hallway near the vending machines. He said the photo mattered because it caught a small truth at the exact right second. He also said the hospital planned a training session with a new rule. Wristbands would be applied only after a complete scan and a spoken name confirmation. Kira asked about the visitor sticker and the laundromat card. Loren said the family had seen those items and that they were grateful for the detail and care. There was a final meeting about the phrase kept photo, because the tool policy warned against storing faces. Loren documented the server failure and the pending icon. He wrote that the photo had been preserved to support timely reporting during a pilot outage. He signed the form with a date and left a copy in her file. Mateo teased her gently about her habit of triple-saving things. He said she was a walking archive with a neat ponytail and an allergic reaction to loose ends. She laughed, then stood quiet for a breath. She thought about the palm writing and how small a warning can look when a hallway feels crowded. Weeks later, a new kiosk arrived with better network checks. The printer trays carried bold labels, and volunteers learned to stop and verify whenever carts bumped. Kira kept a printed run sheet from that night in her desk. The sheet had her small notes about the lighthouse sticker and the ice in the cup. An instructor asked her to teach one class for new hires. She told them about the photo and the band, and the way tiny signals can vanish under noise. A student asked how she remembered so much. She said she wrote on index cards, and she made little recordings after calls while the radio was still warm. The sister sent a letter with a simple line. "Thank you for noticing the sticker." It made the phone call shorter, and it made the goodbye kinder. Kira folded the letter into the run sheet and closed the drawer. She washed her coffee cup, then walked outside to breathe the late shift air. The city sounded like a distant fan that needed oil. She wondered how many small warnings slide past each night because nobody has a free hand to catch them. She knew the photo would fade into policy and training slides. She also knew that a single clear frame can hold a hallway steady when clocks feel slippery. On quiet nights, she drives past the motel on her way home. The neon still flickers, and the car wash still hums across the frozen curb. She thinks about the visitor sticker and the lighthouse logo. She thinks about the wrong name on a band and the right name in a folder miles away. She is not someone who keeps trophies from hard calls. She kept that one photo long enough to send it to the right folder with a receipt. The fact that it stayed during a glitch felt like the kind of accident that refuses to be ignored. It asked for someone to slow down. Her work is not a string of heroic saves. It is a long practice of noticing small, true things before they slip beneath a wave of noise. The photo taught her something she already knew. Details are not decorations, and time is never a blur when someone chooses to write things down. The story ends without fireworks because that is how most true stories end. A hallway returns to normal, and a system gets a little less clumsy. Kira drives home with the window cracked and a song on low volume. She knows nothing can make the loss tidy, but clarity still matters. She unlocks her door, drops her bag, and checks her phone for one last message. The queue is empty, and the app finally reads, "Upload complete." She smiles once without any triumph, then she turns off the light and lets the day settle while the city hums and the clock keeps moving. The bridge collapse files of Red River County. Locals in Clarksville still point toward the slow bend of the Red River and mention a span that failed without warning. They talk about a sound like lumber snapping across a barnyard and a brown cloud that rolled off the water. Some say the river went quiet for a full minute. Others insist the current rushed harder against the pilings. The event sits between printed pages and tired memories, where dates blur and names drift across coffee counters. Investigators never confirmed a single narrative, and the surviving paperwork reads like a map with two north arrows. The first name that appears across the county file from 2009 is Thomas Avery, 52, consulting civil engineer, in town to review seasonal scour near the east abutment. He arrived from Texarkana on a rented pickup, carried a folding stadia rod, and booked a room at a roadside motor court. His notes, reportedly scanned and misplaced twice, show pencil sketches with neat arrows along gravel approaches. He wrote that spring runoff had undercut a clay shelf and that riprap placement lagged a full year. He planned a second pass at lower water with a contractor present and a county foreman on site. Dispatch logs from the same period reference Maria Kent, 41, paramedic with Red River EMS, sent toward the span after a motorist report about drifting planks. Her unit rolled north on farm-to-market roads with steady radio checks and a quiet engine whine. The log timestamps conflict with her own written addendum, which places her arrival 8 minutes before the first deputy. She noted empty guardrails and a harder breeze from the west that pushed dust into the shallows. She stayed at the south approach and waited for a crew to secure a lane with cones and a chain. A third figure threads through state records and later summaries: Caleb Ross, 29, county road crew foreman, scheduled to meet Avery for a survey walk. He reportedly left the yard early with a steel tape, a faded vest, and a thermos dented along one side. The daybook from his shop lists a fuel top off at 6, a load of rock at 7, and a plan to check the far pier before lunch. Some locals claimed Ross stopped at a grocery for ice and never returned to the truck. Others stated he reached the bridge and waved toward the river. The record of his exact route remains unsettled, and the receipt pile is thinner than expected. Archive notes say the span was a modest truss with timber decking and 3 concrete piers set in an easy channel. The far bank rose into cottonwoods, and the near bank held a graded turnout where anglers backed trailers down a slab. Maintenance logs speak of patched planks and a cracked bearing plate that had been shimmed on a wet afternoon. The repair order shows a red pencil remark that reads, "Still serviceable under single lane only." No one signed a final clearance, and the renewal request died in a stack under a broken stapler. When the structure failed, the sequence becomes a field of magnets pulling in different directions that never quite align. One witness claimed the center deck dropped first and sent a chalky burst downstream. Another insisted the south approach slumped after a truck braked near the crown. A rancher reported hearing 2 distinct impacts with river echoes that sounded like a hallway door. A retired teacher described one long groan as if the river dragged a wet rope across iron. The statements share details but resist consensus, and each page announces certainty with careful handwriting. Avery's pocket notebook surfaced in a banker's box long after the final insurance letter closed. The pages record a sounding taken with a weighted line that read 14 near the mid-channel and 9 closer to the leaning pier. He wrote that drift loads had increased after a storm in early spring and that the upstream pile showed fresh scars. There is a sketch of a void under the clay lip where minnows flick through pale water. He underlined a sentence about scour mitigation with quarry stone and a call to confirm availability within 2 weeks. Kent filed her final report with a tone that suggests fixed habits and a tired office chair. She lists scene hazards that include rebar ends, loose decking, and silt clouds that limit visibility under the truss. She notes a single pickup at the turnout with no occupants and an open toolbox on the tailgate. She records a radio check to County Fire and a request for mutual aid from a neighboring district. Her remarks end with a line about river traffic and 2 anglers who declined to provide names due to a pending tournament. Ross appears next in a terse memo that cites secondhand remarks and a phone call that reached voicemail twice. The memo claims he had walked the south bank with Avery a week earlier and marked 3 soft pockets with orange paint. It suggests he planned to return with fabric and stone once the river fell below the chalk line on the pier. The last certain fact is a signed receipt for gloves and a set of safety glasses at a hardware counter near the square. Every later detail arrives from someone who heard something in a cafe and tucked it between lunch notes. State records list 2 inspections spread across 5 years, with photographs that show a lean toward the east and a hairline crack along a bearing seat. The earlier inspection recommended a load posting that never appeared on either approach. The later inspection assigned a priority that competed with 3 other spans and a culvert collapse on a farm road. A funding note mentions a grant request that stalled after a change in office staff. The document trail grows faint as winter budgets pressed into spring potholes. Mechanical analysis came from a district engineer who used calm sentences and short clauses built for public meetings. He identifies repeated wetting and drying cycles along the timber deck that forced nails to creep. He points toward undermined clay and a narrowed channel that bent current lines against the mid-pier. He writes that a failure origin cannot be fixed with absolute precision due to scoured evidence and missing deck pieces. He asks for a dewatering plan and a crane that never materialized. The county file from 2009 includes photographs with date stamps that do not match the captions typed below. One frame shows a sagging guardrail with rust blooms and a waterline printed like a belt across concrete. Another shows tire marks that end at a splintered edge and a hat resting on a plank. A third shows an empty river surface patterned by wind from the west and a line of bubbles near the far pier. The chain of custody sheet lists a deputy who transferred out and a clerk who retired without an exit interview. Reporters drew maps on legal pads and drove the approaches with a cautious speed of someone reading old pavement for hints. Their articles stitched interviews with shop owners and two fishermen who claimed the river changed color after the first impact. One piece quoted a former inspector who said budget cycles have their own weather and you dress for whatever arrives. Another quoted a county commissioner who insisted the span stood within normal service metrics. The printed narratives offered resolve, while the river ignored the words and moved on. Avery left town within a week, recorded by a receipt for fuel and a breakfast ticket punched with a dull hole. He returned once in late summer to present a slide deck with cross-sections and equation lines that bored the room. He recommended stone placement and new bearings cut for the southern seat. He suggested a temporary Bailey to restore a single lane with strict limits. The minutes reflect nods without motion and a closing remark about waiting for cooler weather. Kent rotated off the ambulance for a quarter and took dispatch shifts under bright fluorescent light that flattened the hours. She handled calls about livestock on roads and a boy with a broken wrist and an older man short of breath. When the bridge comes up, her voice stays neutral while her hands move over paper with careful steadiness. She writes that the river remains a hazard zone and that signage needs nightly checks. She never claims more than the logs can support, and her addenda end with standard phrasing. Ross's path fades, where the road leaves town and crosses open fields toward the old ferry traces. Some locals claimed he was seen near the cottonwoods with a level rod, others placed him at a diner booth that never matched the receipt times. A cousin remembered a story about hauling stone past sunset while the radio caught distant stations. A former coworker insisted Ross called about fabric rolls and left a voicemail that never saved. The file keeps his name, but not his last location, and the river keeps its distance from closure. By winter, the approaches were fenced with mesh, and the signs leaned under north wind that smelled like iron. A temporary span sat in the planning folder and moved between committees like a slow truck. The budget hearings pressed on with pipe repairs and a school roof that leaked onto maps. The river dropped into pale seams across sandbars, and the water showed twisted metal like ribs. People drove around the detour and learned new turns that soon felt old. In spring, a work crew staged rock on the south bank and built a ramp with compacted fill and a simple slope. They moved stone against the lean of the current and watched the water change sound as voids filled. They left gaps where the divers wanted clear space and marked a lane with tall posts. A man with a clipboard checked quantities while a crane idled near the turnout. Nothing in the record names him, and no photograph shows his face. Years later, the road pulls straight toward a replacement span that rides higher over a more disciplined channel. The guardrails shine against early sun, and the deck hums under light traffic that stays within the posted signs. Downstream, the old pilings sit in shallow water like molars under a tired gum line. People fish near the shade and glance toward the bank where the gravel turnout still holds a hard edge. The current moves past their boots and says nothing that a recorder can keep. The file ends without a conclusive sentence, and the county clerk wrote, "Closed for now," along the final margin. The failure sits among numbers and measured lines and voices that hold equal conviction. The river holds its own private archive and never shares the index with the courthouse. The names remain in lists that wait for some future reader to try another alignment. Paper can repeat a story, yet the sound that began the story does not return. The ferry passenger who never disembarked at Sitka. On a cool morning in Sitka, port workers watched a ferry ease through Sitka Sound while gulls traced slow circles overhead. The vessel's horn rolled over water that smelled of kelp and diesel and early rain. Among the manifested arrivals, one name would reportedly remain unanswered at the terminal doors. People wheeled bags across wet pavement while radio traffic clicked and paused around the ramp. The absence did not ring alarms first, it only lingered as a missing footstep in a practiced routine. The passenger, listed as Charles Weaver, was 62, a retired accountant from Spokane traveling to Sitka to visit his younger sister. He had boarded at Juneau 2 nights earlier, carrying one rolling suitcase and a canvas daypack. A purser noted his quiet demeanor and a habit of reading schedules taped beside stairwells. State records list his height, his gray hair, and an emergency contact with a Washington area code. His purpose in Sitka was simple. He planned to help arrange minor repairs at a family rental. The crew roster that week included a junior deckhand named Ian, 27, who worked nights cleaning rails and checking life rings. He remembered a man matching Weaver's description standing alone near the stern during the long run south. The wind carried spray and conversation toward the cafeteria, where lights stayed warm through the small hours. Some travelers slept against windows, while others played cards near vending machines that hummed against the bulkhead. Ian said he noticed the man review a folded map, then pocket it when the aisle cleared. Dispatch logs from the terminal record the arrival time at dawn, with light rain sweeping across Baranof Island. The ramp grounded against the apron, and trucks rolled off while several pedestrians gathered under a metal awning. A clerk scanned barcodes as passengers filed past a yellow line where a guard checked random bags. The logs show a brief power flicker in the terminal hall, then a reset that lasted under 1 minute. No incident codes were assigned, and operations resumed without delay or comment. Weaver's sister reached the terminal late after a stalled school zone detour near Sawmill Creek Road. She parked near the chain-link fence and watched the last pedestrians scatter toward taxis and waiting relatives. By her account, the rain slowed and a mist sat low across Crescent Harbor. She checked her phone and called twice. Without success, the calls rang without answer, and times were stamped in her provider records. She later told officers she felt uneasy without any specific reason beyond a silence that extended past habit. When baggage carts emptied, a single gray suitcase circled on the belt with no claimant stepping forward to lift it away. The tag matched Weaver's name and routing, printed in black on a laminated slip. A terminal agent moved the suitcase behind a counter and wrote a simple note on a clipboard. No alarm was triggered because unclaimed luggage appears with predictable frequency on rainy mornings. The agent set the suitcase on a shelf and returned to help a couple searching for a misplaced fishing rod. Archived notes taken that afternoon indicate officers spoke separately with 2 travelers who remembered a man fitting the description. One was an art teacher from Sitka who sketched whales from the solarium during the night hours. She recalled the man leaning on the rail near Mount Edgecombe's faint outline when clouds parted for a moment. Another was a mechanic from Ketchikan who said the same man bought coffee twice and asked about taxi prices in town. Investigators never confirmed the timing with receipts, and no surveillance covered the solarium benches. The county file from 2009 in a separate missing traveler case shows a similar pattern of unclaimed baggage and unclear disembarkation. That earlier file included a ferry manifest, a terminal sweep, and door checks against wind gusts that sometimes move latches. It also noted how passengers occasionally exit through service doors when following crew in reflective jackets. In that instance, the traveler was located later at a motel near a cannery road after walking away in heavy rain. Investigators compared the patterns, yet the Sitka details failed to line up cleanly. Ferry officers reviewed internal access logs for closed stairwells that connect vehicle decks and passenger spaces. They found no anomalies, only routine entries by maintenance staff checking bilge alarms and a cleaner replacing paper towels. A camera near the cafeteria recorded partial views of faces during meal hours but missed the corridor leading to the aft lounge. Reviewers watched the files twice and logged timestamps at 5-minute intervals to mark movement clusters. Some locals claimed an extra gap appeared near the end of the recording, yet technicians reported no dropped frames. At midweek, state records show officers walked the shoreline on both sides of the terminal looking for disturbed kelp lines. The tide had fallen quickly after the ferry's docking, leaving slick rocks and sand flecked with broken shells. They checked ladders, pilings, and fenders for fibers or scuffs that might indicate contact with clothing or bags. A harbor patrol boat swept the inner channel while rain stiffened from the south and visibility narrowed along the hills. Nothing turned up beyond a hat band caught on a cleat that belonged to someone else. Weaver's phone connected briefly to a tower outside town at a time that conflicted with the expected walk-off window. Analysts plotted pings against ferry timetables and decided the reading could reflect device drift under poor weather. A later attempt to triangulate from neighboring towers gave no additional certainty for the immediate period following docking. The device never registered a data session in Sitka proper, and voicemail remained unchanged for several days. The phone was eventually found powered down inside the gray suitcase held behind the terminal counter. When officers opened the suitcase with the sisters' consent, they found clothing folded tightly and a small bottle of vitamins. There was also a spiral notebook with mileage notes and simple arithmetic tracking gas costs for earlier segments of travel. A handwritten list named tasks in Sitka, including a visit to a plumbing supplier and a stop at a family storage unit. Nothing suggested immediate plans beyond errands that fit a short visit. The day pack remained missing, and no one recalled seeing it after the ship's cafeteria closed for the night. A taxi dispatcher reportedly checked logs and found no record of a pickup under Weaver's name during the docking hour. Drivers sometimes accept cash riders who wave at the curb, which complicates documentation on wet mornings when lines are short. One driver remembered a man stepping toward the curb, then turning away while fastening his jacket. The driver could not establish the face, and weather limited the view through the windshield that kept fogging despite the fan. The report noted the uncertainty without assigning weight, and the lead stayed open. Some locals claimed the man left the ship early through a service door when the deckhands repositioned chocks around wheel wells. Crew statements conflicted on door status because procedures allow short openings during shifts and quick closures afterward. A safety officer said those doors close against air pressure that resists casual pushes from the outside. He added that wind can trick hinges and create sounds that resemble latches when traffic moves on the ramp. Investigators never confirmed external access during that window, and the theory remained a line in the file. Searchers walked the footpath toward Totem Park, checking benches and thickets where travelers sometimes paused to adjust bags. Rain lifted briefly, and a weak sun set bands of silver across Sitka Sound, while ravens scolded from cedar branches. A groundskeeper reported no new camps or discarded bottles that would suggest a hasty stop. Officers spoke with staff at a nearby cafe who said the morning trade moved quickly with fishermen and hospital employees. No one recalled a man drip-drying near the heater or holding a map with ferry schedules. The sister called relatives in Washington and asked about any change of plans that might redirect the visit. None were reported, and bank activity remained consistent with a careful traveler who used small cash purchases along the route. A credit card charge at Juneau showed a ferry cafeteria meal during a schedule break between legs. There were no Sitka charges and no attempts at withdrawals from machines that dripped onto the pavement near the lot. The pattern suggested momentum toward Sitka, then a full stop without financial movement afterward. Investigators checked hospitals and clinics for admissions matching Weaver's age and description during the week after arrival. No patient aligned with his file, and air ambulance logs listed unrelated cases tied to remote villages and fishing accidents. The harbormaster distributed a brief notice to smaller docks asking attendants to report unattended bags. A trooper walked through a gear shop and asked about any customer who seemed lost or wet beyond the usual rain. Staff could not connect the details to a specific person, and the inquiry ended without a lead. A month later, a hiker on a trail above the Indian River claimed to see a jacket sleeve tangled near a root. Officers climbed the slope and found a torn piece of nylon that had weathered through 2 storm cycles. Fabric comparators could not match the weave to Weaver's clothing because the suitcase sample lacked similar material. The location strained the timeline given the docking hour and the limited paths out of the terminal. The note entered the file under unverified observation and did not change the working summary. When analysts wrote their concluding memo, they listed elements that aligned with a simple failure to disembark through the usual doors. They paired those with elements that resisted such a reading, including the phone found later with no tower contact in Sitka. They added a paragraph on fairy architecture and how movement patterns complicate any reconstruction when cameras leave gaps between spaces. A final section summarized the sister's persistent calls and her quiet visits to the shoreline in the weeks following. The memo ended with language indicating records conflict and that the absence remains without a confirmed path. Years later, the terminal agent remembered the morning every time an unclaimed bag circled the belt after a rainy docking. The memory did not carry definitive images, only small impressions tied to radio clicks and the short flicker in the hall. State records continued to list Weaver as missing, with a note that he was last associated with a scheduled ferry arrival. The file stayed active in annual audits and drew brief attention whenever travelers asked about old cases related to the route. Nothing further emerged, and the routine at the dock moved on with gulls and diesel and rain. The rest stop camera footage from Highway 93. Travelers who stopped along Highway 93 inches northwest Montana still mention a brief clip that circulated for a week. The footage reportedly showed a man walking out of frame near midnight while snow shifted across the empty lot. A sedan idled by the bathrooms and never moved again before dawn touched the pines. No one claimed ownership of the clip, and investigators never confirmed the original source or the download path. The image quality invited arguments rather than conclusions, and the winter air did nothing to settle them. The nearest town was Polson, and the rest stop sat above the lake on a rise that caught hard weather. State records describe the area as a recurring trouble point for visibility and minor collisions during early winter storms. The site had 2 cameras that faced the lot and a third that covered the vending alcove by the mapboard. Archived notes indicate the equipment came from a basic highway contract that rotated vendors every few years without fanfare. None of the paperwork settled where the clip first appeared, and none identified a technician who signed for backups. Some locals claimed a short video floated through a closed group chat used by road crews. The night in question was the second Friday of early December of 2019, according to dispatch logs from Lake County. Snow had begun by late afternoon, and the wind stacked it against the curbs in ridged lines. Plows ran the main lanes before midnight and left a narrow path through the lot for anyone who needed a break. A power blink left the building lights off for several minutes, and then the generator caught and held steady. The logs show a trooper performed a pass-through at 2320 and saw nothing worth marking on the form. The same logs show no calls from the payphone that evening despite the outage. 3 people can be placed there with enough confidence to matter without reaching beyond the available record. The first was Adam Riley, aged 39, a freight driver moving appliance boxes toward Kalispell for a morning offload. He pulled in for coffee and a quick look at his straps, then sat in the cab while the heater fought the cold. The second was Claire Dominguez, aged 32, a biology graduate from Missoula, who drove north to meet a supervisor in Whitefish. She used the restroom and texted a roommate who later saved a screenshot for the county file from 2009. The third was Mark Ellison, aged 50, a state maintenance foreman traveling between stockyards to inspect salt sheds after the first storm. He reported iced hinges on a service gate and left a note inside the supply closet for the morning shift. Accounts diverge when the sedan appears in the frame because the angle creates a small blind spot on the driver door. Riley told a deputy that he saw taillights glow brighter twice, which suggested the driver shifted between gears without moving. That detail appears in state records and survives multiple retellings, even though no mechanical issue was later confirmed. Dominguez only recalled the idling sound and a figure by the mapboard who stood with hands in pockets against the wall. Ellison wrote in a maintenance message that a dark vehicle parked near the trash cans and never rolled forward to the pump. The logs show no pump on site, which means the line refers to the air hose near the curb. The footage itself begins at 23:38 based on a faded timestamp that never received formal validation from anyone. A figure moves from the vending alcove to the passenger side of the sedan with a slow step that never changes pace. Several frames flicker, and the camera catches snow streaks that cross the lens like scratches pulled from film. The figure leans toward the window, then steps away without opening the door and drifts toward the lot exit without lifting a hand. Headlights from a southbound pickup wash the scene for a second, and the figure is gone from the edge of the frame. The sedan continues to idle, and the clip ends without a clear reason for the cutoff. Investigators never confirmed who downloaded the clip or how it left the original storage cabinet inside the utility room. The vendor at the time maintained a small metal box with a lock that technicians opened during scheduled rotation dates. Archive notes describe a misplaced key during late autumn and a temporary latch that could be nudged with a thin blade. The technician who signed for December maintenance reportedly transferred in January and left no forwarding contact beyond a business mailbox. None of this establishes a leak or a deliberate removal, yet the timing continues to bother the county planner. Records conflict on whether the box was inspected before the storm cycle gained momentum. The sedan belonged to an adjunct instructor from Dillon who had borrowed the car from a colleague for a weekend trip. State records confirm the plate and the title while leaving the route vague between Missoula and the reservation boundary. The instructor, aged 42, taught evening classes and managed 2 short shifts at a bookstore to cover early winter bills. She was reportedly traveling to Columbia Falls to help a relative close a seasonal cabin before the deep freezes returned. A receipt from a bakery in Arley places her on the highway after dark with a bag of bread on the passenger seat. That bag appears in a still frame when the headlights glance across the interior during the flicker. Search efforts began the following morning when a wrecker driver reported the sedan idling without a driver and without hazard lights. A deputy arrived first, according to dispatch logs, and found footprints blown over by streaking snow that erased depth. The doors were locked and the keys sat in the center console with a phone buried under a cloth grocery bag. The trunk was empty and the glove box held registration papers and a folded map with a circle around Olney. Dogs brought to the scene struggled with drift lines and veered toward the tree line where wind piled snow into shoulders. Some locals claimed the scent pulled west toward the highway margin before breaking apart near the culvert. Investigators requested broader camera pulls from nearby businesses and workyards that face the corridor between the lake and the pass. Several owners cooperated and offered clips that showed plows and a few pickups and a tanker that turned north before midnight. None of the video showed the instructor on foot, and none revealed a second figure near the sedan during the crucial minutes. Records conflict on whether a white compact parked beyond the main lot for a short interval that might matter. An early report mentions a brief shape near the broken fence where Ellison noted the iced hinges on his form. That note sits in the county file from 2009 because older case folders absorbed later cases for space. In the weeks that followed, the rest stop became a point on a map inside a small conference room in Polson. State records show volunteers checked ditches and borrow pits along Highway 93 from Jet to Rollins during the first clear days. A local pilot offered a slow pass along the lakeshore and reported nothing visible among the shards of ice near the reeds. Troopers returned at night to test reflections and shadow lines across the lot and compared them with the clip in question. They tried to stage a match with a volunteer who wore a wool coat and moved with the same slow step. The camera never produced the same blur, and the lighting refused to line up with the timestamp. A year later, a storm knocked power again, and the generator failed to start, which forced a temporary closure of the site. During that shutdown, workers replaced cables and found a second card wedged behind a plate that covered the main recorder. The card held partial files that opened badly and stopped before the important sequence began, which frustrated the deputy who carried them. A subcontract report states that earlier models sometimes created ghost indexes when power returned after momentary loss. The vendor suggested the card represented a half-written table and not a deliberate swap by anyone with a goal. Investigators never confirmed that explanation, and the working group chose not to issue a statement. Riley kept driving that corridor for another season and later told a reporter that the clip looked cleaner than the original screen. He believed that someone had trimmed noise, which would require access to software and knowledge that he did not possess. Dominguez finished her degree and left the state, though she kept a copy of the screenshot that showed the time. She said the clock on her phone did not match the timestamp, which raised a small question that no one answered. Ellison retired after the following winter and still maintains that a second vehicle idled near the trash cans for a moment. Investigators never confirmed any vehicle beyond the sedan that appears in the known frames. The instructor's family held a private service in Missoula during early spring of 2020 and kept attention away from the site. They worked with a mediator to settle loan questions and a quiet transfer of the borrowed car back to its owner. State records do not reveal friction between parties, and no civil filings came through the courthouse on Main Street. A single notice asked for information regarding the clip and offered a contact that later expired without follow-through. Some locals claimed a new video surfaced 2 winters later and showed the same figure walking at the edge of the lot. Investigators never confirmed the existence of a second clip and warned against reading too much into blurry frames. The rest stop today looks unchanged to passing drivers who slow on the grade and lean toward the lake when wind rises. The vending alcove still holds a faded map with thumbtack holes near the park boundary and an outdated campground icon. A new lock sits on the utility room, and a paper log hangs from a nail where technicians sign in pencil. Dispatch logs still mark minor collisions and a few stranded motorists when the plows fall behind at shift changes. Travelers step out for a minute and talk about the cold that climbs under sleeves before it settles in bones. The lot records what it can, while the cameras blink against snow that moves like static toward the edge of memory. The stories. Why this librarian reopened a cold map drawer. In late September of 2014, the Quiet Town Library off Route 47 got a new head librarian named Corinne Ashland. She was 39, a former archivist who'd spent years cataloging geological surveys for a state university. By all accounts, Corinne wasn't the kind of person to chase ghosts until the day she decided to reopen an old, locked map drawer that everyone else had forgotten. The drawer sat in the basement stacks, labeled Time State Topography 1952 to 1958 asterisk. Its brass handle had gone dull with age, and the key was missing. For years, staff used the cabinet as a makeshift table for coffee mugs and boxes of donations. But one morning, while rearranging a shipment of donated atlases, Corinne noticed a faint rust-colored smear near the label. It looked like dried clay or maybe iron dust. Either way, it didn't belong there. She mentioned it to her assistant, and he laughed, saying, "That drawer's cursed. Ask Mrs. Langley. She swears a surveyor disappeared working on those maps." Corinne smiled politely, but something in her stayed hooked on the idea. She asked around. The drawer dated back to when the building served as a records annex for the county planning office. In the mid-50s, several regional floodplain studies were stored there before the files were relocated or supposedly relocated to the state archives. No one ever verified that. When Corinne checked the archive's digital inventory, she found gaps. 4 missing surveys, all from the same year, 1957. They covered a stretch of riverland that was later condemned for a hydroelectric project that never materialized. That evening, Corinne used a universal key set kept for restoration work and opened the map drawer for the first time in decades. Inside were rolled parchments bound with cotton strings, their edges yellowed. Beneath them, she found a tin box wrapped in wax paper. Inside the box lay a water-stained notebook, a compass with a cracked lens, and a faded photograph of 2 men standing beside a field the size of a football stadium, ringed by survey poles. On the back of the photo, someone had written, asterisk, last day before the dig, GM asterisk. Corinne scanned the initials against old employment rosters. There was a Gregory Mallon, a field engineer who'd gone missing in June of 1958. Officially, he'd left the project for family reasons, but the local paper from that summer told a stranger story. Asterisk, surveyor vanishes near proposed reservoir site. Search suspended after 3 days. Asterisk, no follow-up, no body recovered. Corinne started a file. 1. She called the county records department. A man named Leland Cross, an aging clerk who'd worked there since the 70s, remembered something. Mahlon. Yeah? He was working on the Franklin Bend plan. Whole thing got shelved when the funding dried up. I heard his partner quit soon after. Leland didn't recall the partner's name, but he mentioned an old storage trailer the county once kept near the riverbank. They hauled the trailer out after a flood in the 60s, he said. If anything survived, it's in the historical depot now. The depot was just a few miles away. Corinne drove there that weekend, signed in as a researcher, and requested the Franklin Bend materials. The clerk brought her a warped cardboard box smelling of mildew. Inside were soil samples, invoices, and a reel of magnetic tape marked Audio Log 4 field notes. She had to borrow an old player from the depot staff. The recording was faint but clear enough to recognize two male voices. Asterisk, Greg, you're not logging this, right? Asterisk. Asterisk. Relax. It's just us. But if this ridge keeps sinking, we need to report it. Asterisk. Relax. Relax. Asterisk. Asterisk. We will. After the last survey, the company can't afford another delay. Asterisk. The tape ended with wind noise and a scrape, like a microphone hitting dirt. Corinne replayed it 3 times, listening for landmarks. At one point, one of them mentioned mile marker 12 and the culvert by the sycamores. Using digitized topographic maps, she traced those features to a narrow bend along the river, now fenced off as private land. When she brought this to the local sheriff's office, the deputy shrugged. If you're talking about MrBallen, that case is older than my dad. We can't go digging around on private property for a rumor. But Corinne wasn't chasing rumor. She was following evidence. She emailed a geologist friend from her university days, Dr. Theo Ricks, who specialized in landslide patterns. Theo ran a ground-penetrating radar survey along that same bend under a research permit for soil erosion. The data showed a deep subsidence pocket about 20 feet from the current riverline, consistent with an old collapsed tunnel. Theo sent her the printout and a note, asterisk, you might have just found their camp trench. Asterisk. They returned together a week later. Theo handled the radar equipment while Corinne recorded the coordinates. Near sunset, a small piece of metal surfaced from the silt, a corroded survey tripod leg, stamped Property of Franklin Bend Hydro Limited. The find was modest, but it confirmed the crew had worked exactly where she predicted. From that point, Corinne began piecing the timeline. The notebook from the tin box mentioned sudden soil shifts, pressure readings, and the phrase asterisk, map variance, river shift, not natural. Asterisk. The handwriting was MrBallen's, matching samples from his earlier reports. It appeared he suspected someone had deliberately diverted a drainage channel to falsify flood risk data, possibly to inflate land value before government acquisition. If true, exposing it could have derailed the whole project. The company had millions at stake. MrBallen filed his last note 2 days before he vanished. Corinne cross-checked the company records and found the corporation dissolved in 1961, right after a quiet lawsuit settlement with an undisclosed party. No public record linked it to MrBallen. But tucked inside the notebook's back cover, hidden beneath the lining, she found a short letter addressed to M.R. Hanley, attorney at law. It never got mailed. The ink was blurred but readable enough. Asterisk, they moved the stakes. If anything happens, check the revised map in drawer C. It's the only truth left. Asterisk. Drawer C was the one she'd opened. By early winter, local journalists picked up her findings. The county authorized a limited excavation, mainly to verify the historic maps. When workers dug near the subsidence pocket, they uncovered remnants of an old metal barrel containing drafting tools and fragments of canvas. Among them was a wristwatch, glass shattered, still faintly engraved, asterisk GM, asterisk dental fragments. Nearby, later confirmed MrBallen's identity. The discovery didn't just solve a missing person case, it revealed a quiet cover-up. The original floodplain data, preserved in those maps, showed the river was unstable long before developers planned the reservoir. Ignoring it had likely saved the investors short-term losses, but cost one man his life. The county issued a formal acknowledgement of error, though no one alive faced charges. The land was later rezoned as a conservation area. Corinne kept working at the library, though people now came from all over asking about the librarian who solved the map mystery. She never took credit beyond saying she just followed what was left behind. The old drawer was cleaned, cataloged, and displayed behind glass with the tin box and the compass inside. Every so often, she'd unlock the case to polish the brass handle, and she'd think about Mahlan's note, the way he wrote Time's the only truth left, asterisk. She understood now that archives aren't just about paper or ink, they're about the things people try to bury, and the few who still choose to look. By the next spring, the library basement smelled of fresh paint. The drawer sat quietly in its corner, again, cool metal against the hum of fluorescent lights. And that was enough. No headlines, no dramatics, just a reminder that sometimes reopening the past isn't about curiosity. It's about letting someone finally be found.